A few hours ago, the most wanted man on the planet stopped breathing. Not in a mansion with an ocean view, not surrounded by luxuries, nor escaping in a helicopter. Like in the movies, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The guy who had a $15 million DEA reward on his head died bleeding out in a Black Hawk helicopter of the Mexican army heading to Mexico City, a small town of 5,000 inhabitants called Tapalpa, was his last coordinate, and while his body lost heat in the air, half of Mexico began to burn. Literally. Right now, while you listen to this, there are active narco blockades in 7 states of Mexico. The state of Jalisco is in code red, according to Governor Pablo Lemus. Guadalajara has public transport completely suspended. In Guanajuato, they are burning pharmacies and convenience stores. Because, apparently, when your narco boss dies, the most logical thing to do is to burn the place where people buy aspirin. The United States Embassy issued a security alert, asking its citizens not to go out on the street. Canada did the same for Puerto Vallarta. Imagine being a tourist from Ontario, who arrived to drink a pina colada by the sea, and they tell you, hey, better stay locked in your resort room. Because they killed a man. And now there are people burning trucks on the federal highway. Welcome to Mexico 2026. But here is the truly absurd part. El Mencho had been for almost 2 decades the #1 priority intelligence target of the Western Hemisphere. The DEA had him on its 10 most wanted list. The FBI coordinated binational operations to locate him. The National Defense Secretariat swore they were close to capturing him. And the guy lived in Jalisco, in the state that literally bears the name of his criminal organization, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Operating since 2010, Jalisco wasn't exactly a difficult geographical riddle to solve. It's as if the most wanted fugitive in New York lived in a building called New York Towers on New York Avenue, and no one could find him for 17 years. But today, just any Sunday in February, the Mexican army finally caught up with him in a joint operation with the National Guard, and what followed looks like the script of a B-movie, except that it is real and is happening while we record this. The operation began at dawn in Tapalpa, a town nestled in the Sierra del Tigre, 130 kilometers from Guadalajara. Nice place, by the way. Mountain air, our Yamal forests. The kind of destination where Tapachia families go to escape on the weekend. Also, apparently, the hideout where the most dangerous drug trafficker on the American continent was hiding. The military personnel arrived with all the tactical deployment, helicopters, gunships, armored vehicles, special forces elements. And then the confrontation began. El Mencho was not going to surrender peacefully. This is the guy who built the most violent criminal organization in Mexico. The cartel that shot down a Kuka helicopter of the Air Force with an RPG rocket launcher in 2015. Just to demonstrate firepower. The one who ordered signed narco banners hung on bridges in 12 states. The one who controlled the port of Manzanillo, the Guadalajara airport, and half of the chemical precursor routes from the Asian Pacific. An operator of that caliber doesn't raise his hands and say, "I surrender, my commander." So there was an exchange of gunfire, sustained fire for several minutes, and at some point a projectile hit El Mencho. Militares reports indicate he was seriously wounded. He was evacuated by helicopter, along with 3 other members of the CJNG, who also had critical wounds. None of the 4 arrived in the capital with vital signs. Process this for a moment. The man who for years was considered untouchable, who commanded an army of hitmen, more numerous than the armed forces of several Central American countries, who made governors tremble with a call, and had politicians on the payroll like counter-clerks. That man died in a Mexican government helicopter, without cinematic farewells, without last words for history. Just a medical evacuation flight that proved useless. And while he bled out, at 3,000 meters altitude, his operators on the ground decided that the right way to process the news was to set everything on fire. The narco blockades were activated minutes after the information leaked. The coordination was impressive, if you forget that they are destroying public infrastructure. Trucks blocking federal highways. Vehicles set on fire as barricades. Businesses in flames. In Guadalajara, armed groups set fires at gas stations, pharmacies, and convenience stores at multiple simultaneous points. They threw tire spikes on the main streets to burst the tires of any vehicle trying to circulate. In Michoacán, Mencho's home state, the governor reported blockades in 13 different municipalities, 13 jurisdictions, with roads cut off at the same time. Manzanillo Airport canceled operations because there was no safe way to access the terminal. The situation extended to Colima, Nayarit, Aguascalientes, to Montes, Baja California, and Guanajuato. The American Undersecretary of State, Christopher Landor, posted on X that this represented a great advance for Mexico and the world. "There are more of us good guys," he wrote in Spanish, probably feeling very satisfied with his bilingual Mayadasial phrase. Minutes later, he had to post something else, saying that he observed the scenes of violence with sadness and concern, because it turns out that eliminating the commander does not mean that the problem is solved. Sometimes it means the problem blows up in your face. But to understand why the death of a single man can trigger this level of chaos, you need to understand who Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes really was. And that trajectory is more improbable than any fiction. El Mencho was born on July 17, 1966, in Naranjo de Chile, a tiny rural community in the municipality of Aguililla, Michoacán. If you search for Aguililla today, the first thing you'll see is news about violence and territorial control by organized crime. But in 1966, it was simply a poor agricultural town in an isolated mountain range, the kind of community where people grow avocado and lemon, and where the only realistic aspiration is to save money to cross to the north. And that exactly was what young Nemesio did. Like hundreds of thousands of Mexicanos before and after him, he crossed the border, looking for opportunities. He worked in California, in the Central Valley agricultural region, probably in the fields where most of the migrant labor from Michoacán ended up. He was just another worker, undocumented, invisible to the system, trying to accumulate dollars to send remittances to his family. But here the story takes a turn that would change the criminal map of North America. Sometime in the 80s, Oseguera Cervantes decided that the legal work route was too slow. He started moving crystal. You know what I'm talking about. U.S. authorities detected him. He was prosecuted for federal crimes. He served time in a California prison and was deported to Mexico with a record. And this is the fascinating part of the case. Anyone else would have interpreted that deportation as a definitive sign, a warning that crime has consequences. Oseguera Cervantes interpreted it as a master's degree in illicit business administration. He returned to Michoacán with assets most local criminals didn't possess. Contacts established in the U.S. market. Knowledge of the gringo consumer demand. He understood that methamphetamines represented the future of drug trafficking because production costs were lower and the addictive potential was superior to practically any other substance. He linked up with Ignacio Corona Villarreal, Nacho Coronel, who at that time functioned as one of the pillars of the Sinaloa cartel in the Pacific region. El Mencho positioned himself as his lieutenant in Jalisco, supervising routes and laboratories, while Nacho Coronel kept the recognition and the profits. It was the perfect position for someone with ambition but with patience. He was learning the business from the inside, cultivating his own network of contacts, building social capital within the structure, all while his boss assumed he simply had an efficient subordinate. But what came next proved that Oseguera Cervantes was not just any employee. In July 2010, the army took down Nacho Coronel in an operation in Zapopan, shot to the skull, and Mencho's boss was finished. Any conventional subordinate would have thought, well, my boss died. I guess he'll look for another job. Maybe he'll go with El Chapo, maybe he'll retire. Maybe he'll open a taco shop and pretend nothing ever happened. Oseguera Cervantes calculated differently. He identified a power vacuum and determined that vacuum belonged to him. He partnered with Eric Valencia Salazar, alias L85, and together they founded the Matas Eaters. The name communicated the strategy. They supposedly emerged as a reaction force against the Zetas cartel, who were terrorizing Jalisco with kidnappings and extortion. El Mencho and his group presented themselves as defenders of the people, those who were going to claim the state of that plague. The audacity of the maneuver is notable. A drug trafficking organization executing a public relations campaign to position themselves as community vigilantes. They placed narco banners declaring that they did not extort working families, that they did not kidnap innocent people. And the most improbable thing is that it worked. There were citizens who genuinely perceived them as the lesser evil. By 2012, the Matadors had transformed into the Jalisco New Generation cartel. They no longer operated under the guise of self-defense. They were a drug trafficking organization with a vertical structure, military capacity, and ambitions of territorial expansion. And El Mencho now occupied the supreme command. What El Mencho executed during the next decade deserves study in business schools. If you look past the homicides, he took a regional cartel and scaled it to dimensions of a multinational crime corporation. While El Chapo was busy escaping from prisons and giving interviews to Sean Penn, El Mencho was busy working without media noise, without spotlight, with surgical brutality when the situation required it. First priority, control over port infrastructure. Manzanillo, Lazaro Cardenas, the two most important maritime entry points of the Mexican Pacific. Through there entered the chemical precursors, from China and India to synthesized fentanyl and methamphetamine. Through there product went out to the United States, Europe, and Oceania. Controlling those ports was equivalent to controlling the keys to the entire supply chain. Then, Cane. Then, the land routes Cane, Jalisco, Michoacan, Colima, Guanajuato, Nayarit, Zacatecas, state by state. The CJNG kept expanding its territorial footprint like an oil slick. Sometimes the strategy was to co-opt local groups. Sometimes it was to eliminate them. Sometimes they executed both sequences. First they integrated them and then liquidated them when they stopped adding value. Oseguera Cervantes understood something that several previous capos did not understand. The business is not reduced to transporting merchandise. It is about sustained territorial control, about keeping officials on the payroll, about guaranteeing that police corporations work as an extension of your security apparatus. He functioned as CEO of a criminal corporation, with its own armed forces division. And speaking of military capacity, El Mencho built a genuine war apparatus. We are not talking about hitmen with pistols and stolen trucks. We are talking about artisanal armored vehicles. The famous monsters that look designed for post-apocalyptic movies. Anti-tank rocket launches, surveillance drones, arsenals that would surpass the inventory of armed forces of small nations. The episode of 2015, when they shot down a military helicopter with an RPG killing 8 soldiers, was not an accident. It was a calculated demonstration of firepower. The message was direct. We are not a conventional criminal gang. We function as a parasitical structure. And if the government decides to confront us, we have resources to respond. But what truly differentiated El Mencho from other bosses was his counterintelligence discipline. While El Chapo let himself be photographed with actresses and granted interviews to foreign journalists, El Mencho cultivated absolute invisibility. Intelligence agencies had exactly one photograph of him. A blurry image that seemed captured with 90s technology. $15 million reward, and practically no one could confirm his physical appearance. There is only one verified audio record of El Mencho, an intercepted recording where his voice is heard coordinating some operation. Outside of that, total silence. There was no content on social media. There were no videos. There was no digital trace. The most powerful drug trafficker in the Western Hemisphere was basically a mythological figure with a vocal record. That operational paranoia kept him alive for years. He relocated permanently. He never spent 2 nights in the same location. He maintained multiple doubles in different states to confuse intelligence. No one outside his smallest circle knew his Rematel location. And that circle was consanguineous, literally family. El Mencho structured the CJNG as a mafia-type family business. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, managed the financial operation until she was arrested in 2018. His son, El Menchito, functioned as operational coordinator until he was captured and extradited. His daughter Jessica was arrested in the United States. His brother-in-law Abigail led another faction. It was the Corleone family, but in a Tierra Caliente version and without Coppola's cinematic elegance. The problem with concentrating your organization in family ties is that when they start to fall, the effect is systemic. The last few years represented a sequence of personal blows that were eroding his structure of confidence. Son extradited. Wife in prison. Key operators dead or captured. The siege was tightening, but the CJNG continued expanding. And this is the genuinely alarming part of the model he designed. He built a structure conceived to operate without dependence on his personal leadership. Regional cells functioned with autonomy. The roots were institutionalized. International contacts remained active, regardless of who occupied the top leadership. By 2023, State Department analysts estimated that the CJNG maintained a presence in at least 24 Mexican states and had established cells in the United States, Europe, Asia, and Oceania, an organization with the capacity to act on 5 continents. Oseguera Cervantes had transitioned from a deported migrant to command one of the most extensive transnational criminal structures on the planet, and during that entire period, the Mexican government insisted they were close to capturing him. 6-year presidential terms passed. Calderon, P. Nieto, Lopez Obrador, now Sheinbaum. Failed operations accumulated. The reward rose from 10 to 15 million. And El Mencho remained there, moving through the mountains. Like a spectral apparition. Until today, there is something bordering on the poetic in the outcome. The man who controlled port terminals, airports, and distribution corridors was located in a mountain municipality where there are probably no traffic lights. Tapalpa, a destination Mexicans associate with crafts and family cabins. Not with special forces operations. Perhaps he had been spending seasons there, walking among tourists photographing the landscape. Without suspecting that the most wanted man in the world, he was buying groceries at the corner store. But someone provided information. Someone always ends up talking. With $15 million on the table, loyalty becomes a negotiable concept. And this morning, helicopters appeared over the Sierra del Tigre with precise coordinates. What we still don't know is what follows now. Because eliminating El Mencho does not equate to dismantling the CJNG. And the people who are setting vehicles on fire and blocking highways in 7 states. While you listen to this, those people are not going to disappear, because their commander no longer issues orders. Historical experience suggests that what comes after eliminating a capo is rarely pacification. It is generally violent fragmentation. When they captured El Chapo in 2016, official statements announced the terminal weakening of the Sinaloa cartel. And what happened? The organization fragmented into rival factions. It detonated an internal war. Violence rates increased. Now you have Los Chapitos controlling one faction and the remnants of Mayo Zambada disputing territory, massacring each other. The capture of El Mayo last year intensified the dynamic. Culiacan has been functioning as an armed conflict zone for months, and the CJNG took advantage of that vacuum to expand presence in Sinaloan territories. Now, El Mencho is eliminated, and the CJNG faces the decision of who assumes command. That determination is not resolved by voting. It is resolved by caliber and firepower. When you have 5 or 6 operators who consider themselves legitimate successors and each one has their own armed contingent, and they are all accustomed to resolving disputes through physical elimination of the opponent, you can already project how that negotiation will end. What we are witnessing right now represents only the initial reaction, the emotional outburst of an organization that just lost its founder. But what will unfold during the coming months is where the situation will deteriorate significantly. Why? It is not exclusively the CJNG fighting over the succession. It is the CJNG operating in transient weakness. While rival organizations detect opportunity, the fragments of the Sinaloa cartel, the groups from the northeast, the smaller regional structures that have been waiting years for a favorable juncture, everyone is going to try to capture portions of the territory that El Mencho controlled. It is the perfect setup for a generalized escalation of violence. Mexico has been trapped in the same cycle for decades. They capture a capo, another emerges. They eliminate a leader. The successes multiply. It is like trying to exterminate a hydra by decapitation. Every head you sever generates a proliferation of replacements. El Mencho understood that dynamic. That is why he built what he built. He did not aspire to be El Chapo, the media capo who ends up in a cell, in the US watching series about his own life. He aspired to be invisible, replaceable, a component in a machine that would continue operating without him. And apparently he achieved it. Because, while his organism was losing vital functions, in that helicopter, his operators were already executing response protocols. Without direct instructions, they simply knew which procedures to activate. Do you know what turns out to be maximally ironic? That if he had decided to retire, he probably could have spent his final years without persecution. He had the resources to vanish, to acquire residence in some jurisdiction without extradition. But he continued coordinating. He continued directing. He continued acting as supreme commander because it doesn't come down to money. He had the money guaranteed for decades. It is the sensation of exercising power, the certainty that through a call you can cause governors to change their decisions, that you don't acquire with a property in the Caribbean, that you only possess when you occupy the position of command. And El Mencho preferred to die exercising authority than to live in anonymous retirement. There are almost Shakespearean elements here. The man who accumulated everything, who built an empire from absolute poverty, who transitioned from deported farm worker to fugitive, most wanted on the planet, ends up bleeding out in a military helicopter over the same mountains that witnessed his birth, the same land that saw him grow, saw him die. And now that land is in plans. The coming weeks are going to be chaotic. The coming months are going to be worse. And the coming years, we will probably witness the rise of a new Mencho. Some operator that currently no one has identified. Some discreet guy who is watching how the empire fragments and is calculating how to collect the pieces. Because Oseguera Cervantes invented nothing original. He only perfected a model that existed previously, and that is going to continue existing. Drug trafficking in Mexico is not a problem of individuals. It is a problem of the system. And as long as that system remains unaltered, there will always be another Mencho awaiting his turn. What I can confirm to you is that while all this unfolds, there are people trapped in the middle of this war, people who did not choose this conflict, but have to survive it daily. People who work for these structures not because they want to, but because circumstances presented them with no alternatives. People who joined thinking it would be temporary, and now discover that there is no exit door. And if you genuinely want to understand how it feels to be trapped in that world, how it feels to spend years pretending to be someone you are not, while sinking progressively deeper, I have a video you need to say. It's called POV. You've been infiltrated in the cartel for 10 years and are now one of them. It's the story of what happens when you cross the line so many times that you can no longer identify which side you are on. Because in the end, the distinction between the good guys and the bad guys is not as clear as they would like you to believe. And after 10 years undercover, you are no longer certain which category you belong to. They'll leave it up here for you.